at the pelvic girdle, its osteology. But remember that there's a difference between pelvic girdle and bony pelvis. When we talk about bony pelvis, then you have to include the sacrum and the coccyx. But there's a pelvic girdle, or simply the os cosa, and some people usually call it the innominate bone. Now this innominate bone actually consists of three bones, and that is the superior bone being the ilium, the inferior bones being the ischium, and then the pelvis. And the pelvis is actually shaped like basin, so it's a basin shape. Pelvis literally means basin, and usually it's inclined at an angle of 80 degrees. Now I want to look at the general anatomy of this pelvis that we look at. So this is actually the bony pelvis because we have the sacrum. Yes, the coccyx will be here. There is this triangular shape which we'll look at later. Now this is the superior portion of this innominate bone. This is the superior portion, and it's known as the ilium. These are the inferior bones. This is the anterior aspect of the inferior bone, known as ilium, and this is the posterior aspect of the inferior bone, known as ischium, the sit-down bone. Now, when you take the ilium presents with what we call a wing and ala. Ala simply means wing. You can see this wing-shaped structure, and then a body, wing and a body. Now the wing is larger than the body, but of course the body is quite thicker than the wing. Now on the wing, the superior aspect of the wing, presents with some lines which we call them iliac crests. Now this iliac crest actually has an inner lip of the iliac crest, has an intermediate zone and an outer lip of the iliac crest. Now moving from the superior portion, superior aspect, in fact anteriorly, to the posterior aspect, what happens is that we have what we call the anterior superior iliac spine, a very important bony prominence. And then inferior aspect, we have the anterior inferior iliac spine. Now, as you run your finger, distally, what happens is that this iliac crest, is interrupted with this, projection, and that is what we call the tubercle of the iliac crest, or simply the iliac tubercle. Now, as we move distally, what happens is that as we saw the anterior superior iliac spine, we also find what we call posterior superior and then posterior inferior, which are not very more prominent here. You find those spines as well. Now, if you look at the posterior aspect of the wing of or the ala of the ilium, we have some lines over here, and these lines are known as the gluteal lines, which of course the gluteal muscles find attachment to. Now, if you look at the inner aspects of the anterior aspect of the ala of the ilium, you find that there is this slight depression here, which is actually known as the iliac fossa. Now, the body actually contributes to the formation of this concavity, cup-shaped concavity known as a stabulum. It actually contributes to its formation. And connecting, we said there's the ilium, this is the ilium, and this is the pelvis. There is a prominence over here, which is known as iliopelvic eminence, which we find very important. Now, in addition, it slightly, can contribute to the formation of this, obturator foramen, but majority of it will be contributed by the ischium and the pelvis. Now, moving on to the ilium also presents with the body. And then it has this time around two what we call branches, and these branches are actually known as the rami of the ilium. There is a superior branch, and that is known as the superior ramus of the pelvis. There is an inferior branch, which is known as the inferior ramus of the pelvis. And there is this body. Now, on the body, superiorly, we find that just away from a fibrocartilaginous structure, which I want to show it here, just away from this fibrocartilaginous structure, okay, moving away, is actually what we call the crest of the pubis. So pubic crest, and then just lateral to it is this prominence, very important for the bony anatomy, and this is known as the pubic tubercle. Pubic tubercle, very important. Now, again, you realize that the superior as well as the inferior rami of the pubis actually will contribute to the formation of this obturator foramen. Now, this obturator foramen in the living, is actually covered almost entirely, leaving a superior opening, small superior opening, which is known as obturator, canal, obturator canal. And this obturator foramen will be covered by what we call obturator membrane in the living. Now, the next part is actually known as the ischium, the sit-down bone, the ischium. Now, this ischium actually, will present with actually a body, will have a body, and then it will have a ramus. It will have a body and a ramus. Now, its body, its inferior aspect of the body, is actually roughened, which is usually the plate point where we sit on it. That's why I'm giving it the name the sit-down bone. Now, the ramus actually is continuous with the inferior ramus of the pubis. Therefore, we tend to give it a common name, ischiopubic ramus. Ischiopubic. So, ischiopubic ramus is actually formed from the ramus of the ischium and the inferior ramus of the pubis. So, realize that in fact, this ischiopubic ramus is actually contributing to the formation of this obturator foramen. Now, having seen this, what happens is that this acetabulum that we talked about, which is this cup-shaped structure, actually presenting with a cavity guarded by this margin, acetabular margin, which is often interrupted with this notch, acetabular notch. Now, having seen this, then what do we call pelvic brain? There is this, something that we have to understand, pelvic brain. Now, pelvic brain is going to help us, or essentially the pelvic inlet is going to help us to demarcate what we call the greater pelvis, which is the superior portion. If I take an imaginary line this way, then above where my hand is will be the greater pelvis, and then below it will be the lesser pelvis. In fact, the greater pelvis, is otherwise known as the false pelvis, with the lesser pelvis being the true pelvis. Now, if you look at the boundaries which form this brim, this pelvic brim, then actually we will talk about, what we call the pectineal line or the pecten pubis, which is actually found, on the superior ramus of the pubis, pecten pubis, and then it will continue on the wing of the ilium as upward line, and then from the upward line we will get what we call the boundary which forms the wing. So we call it the ala of the sacrum, ala wing of the sacrum, with this prominence here being the sacral promontory. So these are going to contribute to the formation of this pelvic brain, and it will actually serve as the inlet of this pelvic, or the superior pelvic aperture. Now, this area becomes the inferior pelvic aperture, or the pelvic outlet, which we will look at. Just by way of, let's say, talking about this, you can see this triangular shaped structure. Actually, we've seen that that's the sacrum, and this sacrum is having some 8 foramina, 4 on either side anteriorly, 4 on either side posteriorly, and these are known as the sacral foramina. These are the anterior sacral foramina, and these are the posterior sacral foramina. We'll get to understand these later. Now, having seen this generally, then what you have to know is that sometimes they are puzzled with this question, that what is the difference between the male pelvis and the female pelvis. Now, generally, the male pelvis is heavier and thicker than the female pelvis. That's one thing. And then again, the male pelvis, present with what? Greater pelvis, larger greater pelvis than that of the female pelvis. Now, for the lesser pelvis, for the males, it tends to be deeper and and narrower, but for female it tends to be shallower, and then wider. That's what we find. Of course, the pelvic inlet for females will be larger than that of males, and then of course, it will assume more rounded or oval shape in females than in males. Males will have it to be more heart-shaped, so to speak. Now, for the pelvic outlet, females will have larger than that of males. That's very common thing that we find. Again, you realize that for females, the coccyx will be more flexible, and then it will not orient anteriorly, as you find in the case of the male, which will be curved more anterior, and it's less flexible. Now, even apart from this, what happens is that we look at what we call the subpubic angle. The subpubic angle, the subpubic angle, the angle between these rami, superior rami, actually the iliopubic rami, this angle, the subpubic angle, is acute in the case of males, but it is obtuse in the case of females. It's more open in the case of females. Now, this is the fibrocartilaginous joint, which will connect anteriorly the two oscles and the two pelvic bones, but posteriorly you realize that they will be connected to each other by this ala of the sacrum. Ladies and gentlemen, this is actually the beginning point of this, and we look at the remaining aspect as far as the pelvis is concerned, in terms of its myology, the blood supply, and what have you. Thank you.